Coming soon from Varos Home Video. All new home entertainment straight from the punishment dome on Varos. Thrilling excitement for all the family. Torture, blindness, and executions in the comfort of your own home. Our on-demand service includes access to all your old favourites. Acid Splashback, The Transmogrifier, Men in Nappies, The Fly, live governor broadcasts where you get to be judge, jury, and executioner. And brand new this season, Q-Switch Bingo. Available now from all good stockists across the 9 galaxies at a new low price of only 20 credits per rotation. Get your subscription today. Varos Home Video is not responsible for any after effects of watching these telerecordings. All liability and indemnity is waived. Your brain may be at risk of implosion if exposed to some extreme violence, sustained punishment, and hideous fashion choices. Varos Home Video is a subscription service. Your dwelling may be at risk if you do not keep up your payments.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and we are joined this week once again by Mr. David Barsky. David, how are you, David?
Very well, thank you, Jason. I do apologize to the audience in advance. So when I had signed up for the 3 consecutive books that include this one as a final, I did not realize that they would be so close together. So if everyone's annoyed by hearing my voice this time, I do apologize. And I'm not just, I know I like to hear a lot of different voices on this podcast. I mean, some are, very entertaining, and I love more perspectives. So again, I hope I have something good to say, whether you agree with it or not.
It is a fact that you tend to be on this show in clusters. You'll do 2 episodes in a month and then drop out of sight for about 6. Let's go through the encyclopedia of your appearances. You began with episode 22, Revenge of the Cybermen. Now, what's interesting about that one is you and I both liked that story, and we thought we were the only ones. I was listening to an episode of the Doctor Who show out of Australia, and they were just covering all of season 12. And the 2 hosts there, Rob and Dave, both gave equal marks to Revenge of the Cybermen and The Ark in Space, putting them almost on the same footing, which is not an opinion that I've heard, and I don't think Revenge is that good. But it's good to know that some other podcast out there is spreading the word that Revenge of the Cybermen is definitely remembered for all the right reasons as opposed to the wrong reasons.
Well, I'll have to give that a listen. That's great news. I'm not sure I agree with that either, but I mean, a lot of it for that episode, that story is nostalgia factor for me. It's my first one that I saw in its entirety as a fan. So I'll have to check that out.
Now, that episode was recorded a couple of months ago. My podcast backlog is back to about 2 months. But they're also reviewing it in comparison to the things that are going on with Doctor Who in the 2024 series. And they think Revenge of the Cybermen, plot-wise, compares favorably to, say, for example, the way that Sutekh was used in the recent season. Spoiler alert for an episode that aired several months ago and is available on streaming. You then returned for your second straight Tom Baker, Image of the Fendal, episode 49, and right after that, your third straight Tom Baker, episode 52, the Rebos operation. So your first 3 outings were all Tom Baker outings.
Not a bad start, I'd say.
And then your goal at that point was to do 1 for every Doctor. So you came back for the 5 Doctors, and that, of course, is 5 Doctors all in one, except for William Hartnell, he's not in it, and except for Tom Baker, he's only in it as archival video. You were also joined by Stacey Smith and Graham Burke. That was my first multi-guest episode. You did Inferno, episode 89, for the 3rd Doctor proper. Oh, there's an argument to be made that the 5 Doctors is a 3rd Doctor story, and everyone else is peripheral to it. But Inferno is definitely the 3rd Doctor all by his lonesome. You came back for the 5th Doctor in episode 92, Planet of Fire, which I think is a phenomenal story.
It is.
You came back for the Space Museum, episode 116, fairly recently, to cover your first proper William Hartnell. And then right after that, episode 122, the Macra Terror. That's the 2nd Doctor. So now, this is episode 128. Paradoxically, it is book 106, but episode 128. You are finally having a new Doctor. You are doing your first and only 6th Doctor episode. So now you've got 6 out of the 7 under your belt.
I got to tell you, when I selected this, I had totally forgotten how late it was released chronologically outside of its number. So I had no idea where it was going to land. I asked you for several months. When is this one coming up again?
It is book 106, and it was supposed to be released alongside books 105 and 107, as you would expect in the ordinary course of events. Episode 105 is Time Lash, which I released and recorded at Galley in February 2024 with the great Simon Gurrier. And then the actual episode 106 was Mark of the Ronnie, which came out right around the same time, and The King's Demons with Jim Sangster, one of your co-producers on this show. That's when it was supposed to come out. However, to paraphrase the great quote about Douglas Adams, Philip Martin's approach to deadline is he loves a deadline. He loves the whooshing sound that it makes when it goes past, and then he watches it ricochet across the far wall, bounce out the door, into the street, down the gutter. He's got to walk outside, get on his hands and knees, lower a rope with a hook into the gutter, pull the deadline out, bring it back up, make sure it doesn't catch against the grade, bring it inside, clean it off, put it on the table. So it took 2 years for this book to be delivered after it was due, which is why the book comes out number 106, even though book 127 and book 127 are the 2 books immediately before it. How's that? And it has cover art that is 2 years old because David McAllister left the range after the Space Museum, and he has not done a painting in a while at this point. And we're back to the neon tube logo, even though the books have moved on to the Sylvester McCoy logo. This book comes out in between seasons 24 and 25, closer to season 25 than 24. So it is just a big old mess for the targets. And then Philip Martin will do something like it when Mind Warp comes out a little bit past its deadline, and Mind Warp is not going to be until book 139, long after the rest of the Colin Baker era has been put to bed in Targetland.
Well, luckily, as Doctor Who fans, we're all familiar with the timey-wimey, and we get it.
So speaking of wibbly wobbly, let's talk about other things before we get to Vengeance on Varos, which is not my favorite Doctor Who topic of all time. We are recording this in the middle of a run of just one massive obituary after another. We have had Maggie Smith just died a few days ago. Mm-hmm. Chris Christopherson died almost immediately after that. The stage actor Gavin Creel, much younger than the other two, died yesterday. Pete Rose, age 83, a blemish and a blight on the face of baseball, died yesterday. It is just a rough time for celebrity obituaries. And John Amos died today from Good Times, which you and I both grew up with.
I didn't hear that.
What?
Oh, my God. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I loved that show. And I watch Good Times all the time, every single night. And let me tell you something. When I first came to California, I worked at Universal Studios, and I was a parking lot attendant was my first job. Then I became a security guard. Then I became a manager of the parking lot. And I'd see celebrities. Celebrities would come up there all the time for shows, because we had an amphitheater there where they played music. I escorted Prince off the lawn once. I mean, whatever. And I liked Prince, sure. But, and I met all these people. And one day, a car stopped and was looking for directions for Tony Roma's The Rib Joint, and it was John Amos. And it was the first time I was, like, starstruck.
Wow.
Of all the people I've seen, because I love that show. And I said, hey, man, are you John Amos? And he said, yeah. And I said, oh, I love Good Times. And I shook his hand. The guy has just such presence. And he was such a cool guy. And luckily he made it to Tony Roma's based on my directions. And I think he had a good meal. So I never saw him again. But that is so – I'm really broken up about that. Thanks for starting off on that note, brother.
Yeah, I really rock you back on that one. He was he was in 2 of the great late 80s action adventure movies in secondary roles. He was in Die Harder.
Die Hard 2, yeah.
And he was in a movie that is one of my favorites because I don't have, obviously, I can't name drop like you. I wasn't manager of the security guard parking lot at Universal. I was not an executive producer. I wasn't a field producer. I haven't been on television nearly as many times as you. But when I worked in a movie theater on Long Island in the summer of 1989, United Artists would send out every week a half-hour cassette of trailers for us to play in the lobby. It was a single 19-inch TV mounted up against the wall, and we were playing the same 30-minute cassette of trailers over and over again. And I worked there. I'm a high school student, so I'm capped at 20 hours a week under my working papers. But 20 hours a week means that you were watching that cassette 40 times every week, and then it's swapped out for a new one. Lockup, the Sylvester McCoy, Donald Sutherland action picture. It's basically a minor league Clint Eastwood movie. Sylvester Stallone. I was going to say
you literally said
McCoy.
Sylvester McCoy.
Wow.
That's great, though.
Fun fact: Sylvester McCoy is taller than Sylvester Stallone.
I would totally watch that, by the way.
Sylvester Stallone and Donald Sutherland. Sylvester Stallone has been he's in a minimum security prison. He's about to get out. He was, wrongly convicted. He's got a loving girlfriend on the outside. He has beef with Donald Sutherland, who is the warden of a much nastier maximum security prison. Sutherland arranges for Stallone to be transferred into his prison and proceeds to just abuse him over the course of the movie until, of course, goodness prevails and the man who has been wrongly accused manages to defeat the system. John Amos plays head of security at Donald Sutherland's prison. And he's kind of a good guy, but he's kind of an antagonist at the same time. But Donald Sutherland is just chewing the scenery, and it's glorious. Stallone, he was friends with the band Survivor, which had its origins in the band The Ides of March, so the song Vehicle plays prominently throughout the movie. Mm-hmm. I believe a young Tom Sizemore is on Lockup. Very good movie. Terrible, but very good.
I'll have to check that one out. I don't believe I've ever seen it, but man, oh god, yeah.
But the trailer was aired again 40 times a week, so Sutherland comes out, "Welcome to Gateway Leone," and he just says it over and over again because we're watching that trailer over and over again. So yeah, John Amos was in that movie. Awesome.
I definitely will check that out then.
And to be sure, Sylvester Stallone, not Sylvester McCoy.
No, not a problem. Well, yeah. Oh man, yeah. It's been quite a week, but I have something for you that it's been a good week for me because just yesterday I received this in the mail.
Ah, that is the DNA of Doctor Who, the Philip Hinchcliffe years. That is the Cutaway Comics, produced by Gareth Kavanagh, friend of this show, and I believe edited by Gary Russell, also a friend of this show.
Yeah, yep. And our friend Graham Burke had done a lot of the interviews for this with Phil.
Right. The original plan was for Graham to do a straight-up biography of Philip Hinchcliffe, and that morphed into this book, which is more of an anthology of essays from a mix of new writers and veteran writers.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig into it. As I said, I just got it yesterday, and hopefully get Phil to autograph it. If we see him soon, hopefully he'll come to Galley or something like that. One never knows.
Which bonuses? Because when you pledge to Cutaway Comics, there's always the bonus levels. Which bonuses did you get?
I don't even remember. This was crowdfunded, of course, but I don't know anything about the Cutaway Comics. I just did this on this level. I just bought this outright, I guess.
When you pledge, there's usually a boost. For each level of pledge, you get some extra bonus. Usually it's a DVD with audio commentary. That's probably it.
I got this, yes.
There's probably several audio commentaries of Doctor Who stories with Gareth and Philip Hinchcliffe and whoever else happens to be in the booth, is my guess.
There is a video in conversation, Philip Hinchcliffe, fantastic, the Hinchcliffe years. There's audio exclusive of the Genesis of the Daleks commentary, and there's archive audio of Pyramids of Mars commentary, Hands of Fear, and Deadly Assassin.
Wow, that is quite a CD there.
Yeah.
For those of you who are new to Doctor Who literature, Philip Hinchcliffe has been on this show 3 times for The Seeds of Doom, Keys of Marinus, Mask of Mandragora, and also the Chris Boucher Memorial episode, which was early 2023.
And, for the week that was and the week that will be, I want to show you this very important item.
Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time. That is an amazing cover.
This cover is amazing for a lot of things. Let me tell you about this album. This album is one of my favorites. I was, really into the band. Still am, of course. In 1986, this was released. In fact, September 29th, 2 days ago as we record this, 38 years ago. And it is a science fiction themed kind of album. They don't really mean to do that. The title track is caught somewhere in time. And of course, they got their mascot Eddie as a cyborg on here, and a lot of elements from Blade Runner. I mean, there's the spinner right there, and they include a lot of weird stuff from the band's history, stuff that I'm not going to get into in this podcast. However, this album, as I said, was released in 1986. It was their sixth studio album, so it was released in the middle of the Six Doctors era. And it was literally, the 29th is, if you include that day, is 6 days before the premiere of Trial of a Time Lord, episode 5, which is the first episode of what?
Mind Warp, written by Philip Martin.
Correct. And as it happens, the first song on the second side of this album is called The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Are you familiar with that title at all?
That is a book, I believe.
Actually, I believe it might have been a book. Yes, but it was also a very popular film released in, 1967, I think, somewhere around there. It was a story, I think, from the 50s. And it became 62. It was released in 62. Sorry about that. I was just checking my notes.
That was a little before the capsule from Krypton delivered me in Kansas, so I wasn't quite on Earth yet.
But anyways, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, Iron Maiden based a lot of their songs on movies over the years. But however, that movie features an uncredited role played by Philip Martin.
I was not aware of that. I have quickly gone to the fact machine. You are correct. Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner is released as a film in 1962. And the starring role, an actor that I'm not as familiar with as you are, Michael Redgrave.
Yes, of course. Now, the other thing about the album cover, with all its artwork and science fiction references, on the back of the cover, on the top of a building,
it is a blue box with a yellow light on top and very distinctive 6-panel glazed windows, which you and I know as a British police telephone box. There's one, I believe, at Earl's Court in London.
Yes, I've been there. However, this one is on top of a building, which they never are, unless it's a time machine.
It is, in fact, a TARDIS.
Yes. So the interesting thing also about that, and this week, is I am going to actually be seeing Iron Maiden in San Diego on October 4th, which is 3 days from now.
Wow.
Which is the 30th anniversary of the first episode of Mind Warp. And also, sidebar, after this initial pressing of the album, there was a tape warp during the song The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner that made it onto the vinyl pressings, unfortunately. And I think they're just correcting that now with the new release that's coming out this year. However, so on this tour that I'm going to be seeing, that I actually saw in Edmonton before, they're actually featuring this album in part by playing 5 songs off this album. And The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner is not one of them, unfortunately.
Interesting. Michael Redgrave, of course, is the grandfather of Gemma Redgrave, who has been a semi-regular in Doctor Who for the better part of the last 10 years.
Yep. So anyways, that's my story, and that's my week has been and will be.
How much of the original Iron Maiden lineup will be there on stage in San Diego?
Well, let's see. Everybody from this album is still with the band, plus one more member. They added a third guitarist since then in 1999 when Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith, the lead singer and lead guitarist, respectively, came back in 1999. But they didn't kick out the replacement guitarist. So they now have 3 guitarists in the band. So everyone from this album will be there. But as far as originals, the band had a different lead singer in the first 2 albums. Had a different 2 different guitarists along the way, a different drummer for the first 3 albums. But again, this is their 6th album.
Philip Martin is listed in the Wikipedia for Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, but it is not hyperlinked to Philip Martin, the author, who does have a Wikipedia page.
Interesting. Yeah, and I believe he was uncredited in the film, playing a very small role. He had some minor acting roles before he became a writer and producer.
There's a couple of uncredited actors that I remember from Doctor Who closing credits. So James Cairncross, who was in The Reign of Terror and The Crotons, also has an uncredited role. And John Thaw, Mr. Inspector Morse, also has an uncredited role in the same movie. Fascinating.
I have yet to see that. I've been meaning to for the longest time, and I should probably do it. So I was going to before this podcast recording, but I didn't have time. I have a lot going on. I'm in between trips right now, so I'm trying to squeeze everything I can.
I would add that to my Netflix queue, but of course, with the bursting of the streaming bubble, Netflix is no longer the gold standard for anything. So there's not too much you can find on a Netflix queue these days.
Yeah, they're pretty much doing their own thing, unfortunately, and everyone was taking it back. But they're going to go back. I mean, the studios have to make money, and they're going to eventually go back to selling to other platforms. They just have to, because they're all flailing right now.
You just can't have 12 different streaming services at once. It is not a financial model that makes sense for anybody. But we are preaching to the choir, I expect.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are your travels taking to? Because when I was in Europe last month, everywhere that I went, every photo that I posted of me, you immediately texted me a photo of you having done the same thing 1 or 2 or 5 years earlier.
Yeah, I was in Ireland last year. I know you did that little mini tour of Ireland. You should have seen the Book of Kells exhibit, though, man. That was awesome. And that library is beautiful, Trinity. Oh, God, I absolutely love that. Was one of my favorite parts of our entire trip last year. But a couple weeks ago, we went to Germany, and then we went to Luxembourg. We just gone for 7 nights, but we were initially going to Germany to see Scorpions in Cologne, the rock band Scorpions. But 2 weeks before the show, the entire tour, they have a mini tour in Germany. The lead guitarist fell down the stairs, broke his hand and his leg, and had surgery and needs rehabilitation. So they canceled it. So we kind of didn't go to Cologne. We punted, and we spent some time on the Middle Rhine. It was absolutely beautiful. Then we went over to Luxembourg, and we saw about 10 castles. It was basically a castle tour. Huh. And so we came back last week, and a week from today we're heading off to Japan, which is one of my favorite countries in the world. It's beautiful.
How long will you be in Japan?
For about 2.5 weeks. 2.5 weeks, just a little over 2.5 weeks, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Send me some good photos for sure. Let's talk about Vengeance on Varos. This is Doctor Who, and it's season 22. It's Doctor Who's first real attempt, apart from the occasional Terry Nation meta joke in the 1960s. It's Doctor Who's first real attempt to parody and lampoon television. The Part 1 cliffhanger, and not the U.S. syndicated Part 1, which is the Doctor and Perry walking out of the TARDIS, not very scary at all, but the actual Part 1 cliffhanger of the TV production booth cutting the Sixth Doctor's apparent death in the desert, which of course is an hallucination. As someone who, very flat team structure at Universal, work your way up from security guard to big cheese. How accurate is Vengeance on Varos to the actual production of television?
I got to tell you, one of the reasons why I selected this story is because of, I enjoy a good parody of my selected profession. You don't get to see a lot of. Well, yeah, I guess you do. You see 3 facets of television production here. You get to see the actual behind the scenes of the production, where you see a lot of despotic and sadistic people pulling the strings. And I would say, yeah, that's pretty accurate. You get to see the talent, which is quite often tortured. I'd like to see, I meet a lot of people nowadays who, say, oh man, my family would be great for television. We're just such a reality TV show. I said, listen, you don't want any part of it. It's just ruin your. I literally give that advice whenever I hear this, when someone comes to me with that, and then you get the audience, which I think is it's tough because the audience, of course, with Eric and Etta in Varos, I think is one of the most brilliant parts about the story as televised, but also it portrays them as just gaping idiots. Mouth gaping idiots, drooling idiots, if you will. And I respect the audience more. I've always have. For some of the shows, the most popular show I ever did, of course, was Dirty Jobs for the most part, and we had a very interactive relationship with our audience. We, some of the places we went were submitted by the audience. In fact, by the end of halfway through the 7 years that we did that show, at least 90% of where we went was submitted by the audience. So although I think it works in Varos, I would never say that the audience are drooling masses. Although at least the audiences that I like, I respect the audiences. Although a lot of people don't. And I think based on what is successful on television, what gets a lot of ratings, maybe they are. You never know. I don't watch a lot of TV myself, believe it or not. It's hard, when you're, when you create it. You see things that are mistakes or just bad writing, bad editing, bad directing, and you just it's another element that takes me out of it, So I don't watch a lot of television myself.
Yeah, Mrs. Doctor Who Novels, also a cable TV producer, so she is making TV 8, 9, 10, 11 hours a day, mini studio in our living room, but we don't watch it, except for the shows that she makes. We watch those when they come on, but other than that, we are not big TV people around here. Now, Callie and I will binge watch old shows. We finished Buffy. We're currently in the middle of season 2 of Riverdale, but these are old shows. Riverdale's now nearly a decade old. We're not watching the new cutting edge stuff.
Well, I do the same thing. I appreciate the storytelling a lot more and things that came out in the 70s and 80s and even probably into the 90s to a lesser extent. But I love those. And I love those old movies too. Which is another reason why I chose Varos, because, theoretically it was meant to be a parody of the television viewing audience and a commentary on the video nasty phenomenon, quote unquote, that was going on in England at the time. And I've seen many of those movies. I will make it a point to see all of them eventually, all the movies that were banned. For those who don't know, the video nasties were, a list of movies that were prosecuted and banned in the mid 80s by the British government, and our good old friend Mary Whitehouse led the way a bit on that, and we all know, who is Doctor Who fans, who she is.
Oh my goodness gracious. There is an extra layer to Arak and Etta, and I'll get into this more in the audio essay, which is coming up in about 30 minutes time. I'll just give you a preview. In the novelization, which is based on the much longer draft script submitted by Philip Martin, that includes a lot of material that was either filmed uncut or just never cut in the first place, because the story would have been 7 hours long. Etta has a side hustle with the audience appreciation index. So she is watching these shows for her job, and she's filling out the audience appreciation reports, which is not even a parody. It's just actual text, because the audience appreciation index was a very big part of Doctor Who, and a lot of those reports are included on the Blu-ray collections, and you can see what actual audiences of regular viewers, non-fans, thought of these stories as they came out. And Doctor Who's audience appreciation index numbers were typically anemic in the 50s and 60s, because who watches Doctor Who as a fan is not the same as who watches Doctor Who because it happens to be on in between the football scores and the live music showcase. So that's what Etta is. Etta is literally a non-Doctor Who fan watching Doctor Who because she has to, and she's submitting a lukewarm or negative report. The way that she's played on TV is as a gibbering idiot, cackling and liking Colin Baker's costume. That sort of takes away, I think, from the verisimilitude.
Well, a little bit, yeah. It's funny. There's so much, difference between what happened, as written, as televised, and through the novelization. Even some of the changes he made in the novelization, I was not a big fan. When I think it took a lot away from some of the characters, including Syl. I thought he made him much too comedic. Whereas we're in 1986 right now with this televised story, and you look at all the big movies, the big sci-fi movies out of the time, Total Recall, RoboCop. The big bad was the corporations and the corporate bosses, and that is in part in line with what they're doing here. And I think the character of Syl obviously was greatly popular. It was wonderfully portrayed as one of the best portrayals of this era in Doctor Who, especially for a baddie. And I think he did a disservice. I know you'll cover some of this in your audio essay probably, but I think he made him way too comedic, falling down and whatever he did. And there's a few things in the book that I just didn't enjoy. Trying to get past some run-on sentences on top of it all.
Oh, I will be reading out one of those run-on sentences later on, and I definitely had to pause for breath a couple of times. Those sentences challenge even the most iron-lunged reader.
Oh, it's good. Please tell me one of them's on page 109, where there's a 7.5 long sentence. I'll read it to you right now, if that's not included in your essay, because I would love to try, to tell you the truth. It's literally the second sentence, I think, on the page. 109. No, it's in the middle. It's the first paragraph in the middle of page 109. I dare you to try to read that. There is not a single punctuation. He hates punctuation. And Martin, he loves descriptor words and adjectives and adverbs. I'll tell you that.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. My mother of all run-on sentences in the audio essay comes much earlier in the book. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get out my chronometer. And you are not going to read this. You're not going to race through it like the Micro Machines guy. You are going to read this slowly and with great elocution like the great audiobook readers. And I want to see how long it takes you. So I am calling up the chronometer app on my phone, and I'm very curious to see how we do with this.
I'm going to say I mentioned this one because I wonder, you said there's one much earlier in there. There's another one that's compared that I noticed in this one, but he actually uses punctuation, not that it means anything to him, on the one in page 10. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to.
All right, I'm going to press start. We will add a suitably comedic sound effect for the Doctor Who literature edit.
As the Doctor and Jandar helped Perry and Arita along a dusty, disused passage, they could hear in the distance sounds of unruly discord as the Punishment Dome sound system reacted to the damage done by the group, who now had to cross this realm of chaos towards the mythical safe exit, which allowed freedom and pardon for anyone unfortunate enough to survive the rigors of Quillam's fiendish ingenuity.
That took 22.87 seconds. Now, you cheated twice by taking breaths in the middle of that sentence, and you also said unfortunate instead of fortunate.
All right, I could try again if you really want me to.
Oh, God, no. I never need to hear that sentence again. But the extra syllable cancels out the extra breath. So we'll say that was nearly a 23-second sentence to read.
It's impossible not to take a breath there. I mean, as a human, you have to.
Philip Martin doesn't know that. Philip Martin has not been told that at some point in the future, Michael Stevens and BBC Audio are going to be taking all of these novelizations and giving them lush, gorgeous adaptations with original music and with bonus interviews at the end and just a whole soundscape. He had no idea that somebody was going to be sitting there in a recording booth 20 years later actually having to read that sentence in a single breath.
Well, forget about reading it out loud. I don't think I could sit through reading. I mean, literally, around the third line, I had to go up and get a drink. And then around the sixth line, I had to go to the bathroom. I mean, it was just like, it took forever just to read sitting down to myself in my own brain. You needed a break.
Let's go to the Darren Mooney questions to give us some context here, because I've been very harsh on this story, and maybe I don't need to be.
Well, you know what's funny? I got to tell you, you in your little introduction, you mentioned, you try to avoid a Terry Nation joke, but this is like a Terry Nation serial, which is just way more gory, more of a gory gauntlet than everything Terry Nation could ever conceive. It's just like terror after terror and torture after torture. And that's all that happens throughout this. And the Doctor is somewhat clever, but the problems with it are when he solves problems, he's killing people. The first time is, maybe an accident, fair enough, with the acid bath, but the whole thing with the vines, and granted, Martin took both those things out in the novelization, but still, it's like this is a very different Doctor. We know that. It's supposed to be an action Doctor. I don't even know if Martin was the one who wrote that initially in the script or not. You might know better.
what I meant by Terry Nation is that in the 1960s, Terry Nation would include one meta joke about the unreliable nature of television as a technological medium. So in Keys of Marinus, there's a joke about the TARDIS color television being out of service because the show is filmed in black and white. Terry Nation has to make an explanation as to why the TARDIS, which is much more advanced than Earth technology, has a black and white monitor. In The Chase, they're watching a very advanced time television from the future, but it's also prone to static and the picture drifting off. And they have to, again, explain that TV is not a reliable medium. That's what I meant about television parody. Terry Nation would include those jokes in his earliest scripts. And eventually the technology got better and he didn't have to make those jokes anymore. But what I mean to say about Varos is, for you, does Vengeance on Varos belong on a list of the 60 best Doctor Who stories of what is now its first 61 years?
No. Period. There's no way. I would have to have a long talk with anyone who would place it there, to tell you the truth.
As a corollary to that, would Vengeance on Varos belong on a list of the 10 worst Doctor Who stories of all time?
Oh, boy. Well, if you include the new series, absolutely not. I tend not to think of the new series when I'm thinking about such lists, when I have to make a list. But would it be 10 worst? If it was the classic series alone, it may crack it, yeah.
When I first saw Vengeance on Varos, my PBS station got the Hartnell, Troughton, and Colin Baker package in September 1985. This is New Jersey Network, so not my local station, but one of the 6 stations that I got on my Long Island cable provider. They did a 30-minute documentary called Doctors Who, Old and New, where they introduced that they were getting the Hartnell and Troughton and Colin Baker packages. So they showed a 60-minute clip from Unearthly Child, 60-second clip. They showed a 60-second clip from the Crotons. They listed all the Hartnell and Troughton stories they were showing, which was not the full package because of all the missing episodes. Mm-hmm. Every Saturday night, in movie format, they would show a complete Hartnell in chronological order until they reached Troughton. But the last Saturday night of the month, they would break, and they would show one story from season 22. So Twin Dilemma would have been late October 1986. Attack of the Cybermen was November 23rd, 1985. Attack of the Cybermen would have aired November 23rd, 1985, coincidentally on Doctor Who's anniversary, and it is a backdoor anniversary story. So that means November 1985, the end of the month around Thanksgiving, is when I would have first seen Vengeance on Varos. When I was just 12 years old at this time, I really enjoyed Vengeance on Varos the first time that I saw it. I loved that cliffhanger, the way that it's a meta. The live action characters are editing the drama the same way that the director up in the booth is editing the video. I enjoyed Perry turning into a bird because at that point I had not yet clued in that Eric Sayward's watchword is violent misogyny. And it wasn't until later on that the acid bath scene actually bothered me. When I was 12 years old, I thought it was great. And as you say, the movies were getting very violent in the late 80s. Around this time, you're getting RoboCop. Mm-hmm. You're getting Aliens, which, by the way, is another story about an evil corporation. Mm-hmm. The remake of The Fly is coming out a few months after I would have first seen Vengeance on Varos. So the violence didn't bother me. That is the only time that I've ever watched Vengeance on Varos and legitimately enjoyed it. Every other time that I see it after that, the story's many flaws just jump out and grab me. It is utterly, with the exception of Arak and Etta, I think it is utterly a charmless story. It is too mean.
Completely grim and
cynical.
drably shot.
Drably shot, yes. I want to say this was a Ron Jones as director because as a director, he was one of the least imaginative directors Doctor Who ever had.
Of course it was Ron Jones. He's terrible. He's out. He's one of the worst there is.
Jonathan Gibbs, again, he's not exactly Roger Limb, but you don't usually go to Jonathan Gibbs for melodious music that you can hum. He's no Paddy Kingsland. He's no Peter Howell.
Right.
There's just not a lot of there to this story. It's just too mean. It's too cynical. And the acid bath scene is not even nearly as bad in the book. The book is what Martin wanted the acid bath scene to be, where the doctor is actively pushing these guys and tripping them into the bath. On TV, at least you could say that it's accidental. The book is even worse.
But he doesn't make the crass joke about it, in the book. So I listen, I hear what you're saying about you maybe sort of desensitized by this time given the movies that are out, but I'm fine with all the violence. I mean, like I said, I like video nasties, but I don't want the doctor to be the one who is violent. I want him to be more creative in how he solves problems. And that's the other thing about this. It's another one at the end. Yeah, sure, he's clever with his tongue. He convinces people to do a few things. But, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we found another source of Zeton 7. And that's how the main problem with, well, I guess it's one of the main sources of tension with with the governor and all that, and with when it gives the governor leverage and it gives him, allows him to survive and not be killed on television, sure, but it just seems like the doctor could have used his cleverness to really fake out Syl, never mind the bad people who are creating television on this planet. I mean, look, and that's another thing. It's like they made a little bit more of it in the book as well with Syl's malfunctioning, communicator, translator. And I'm like, they missed an opportunity there that the doctor could have done something with that trick Syl into a more satisfying resolution to the Syl problem and his greed and strangleholding this entire planet. I don't know, just me. I mean, 2020 is hindsight, sure.
Philip Martin will come back twice. There is a Syl story that is supposed to be in the original season 23, which is canceled because of the cancellation. That comes out as a missing adventure published by Target, one of the lost stories. And that's going to be coming up fairly soon on this show within the next few months. Mm-hmm. And then he comes back for the real season 23, and he does Mind Warp and writes the novelization of that. So there are 3 Syl novelizations, all written by Philip Martin. Now, the next book, Mind Warp, has much fewer run-on sentences than Vengeance on Varos, to my recollection. So it's a more positive reading experience. But I am just not a fan of the Philip Martin verse. I appreciate what Nabil Shaban is doing. He is going full-on method to play Syl, and it is a stunning Titanic achievement. But I don't like the character. It just doesn't – what he's doing as an actor, going all the way there, doesn't appeal to me. I don't get enjoyment out of watching Syl.
I can hear you. I can hear you there. I mean, he's literally gross. I mean, he's sitting there talking to people, eating – slimy peaches that'll give him the runs and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I just think I absolutely hated him the first time. I think this is a disgusting character. I'm not enjoying this, and he's a big part of it. But you know what? I have to marvel at the creativity of the performance and the costume at this point in my life, and that's how I watch Doctor Who now, with a more academic eye. And he's one of the things I look forward to now as I watch this. And I probably won't watch it many more times in my life, granted. But Eric and Etta, and also Syl. I mean, I don't care for anybody else in this entire program.
I appreciate the art that went into the design and performance of Syl, but it isn't fun for me to watch. The way that Gabriel Wolf in Pyramids of Mars, I could watch that over and over again, never get tired. With the exception of Time Monster, Roger Delgado's more subtle performances, I can watch them over and over again, never get tired. Syl's type of villainy doesn't quite tickle my funny bone, which leads to the next Darren Mooney question. Would you put Vengeance on Varos on your list of your 60 favorite Doctor Who stories? And I think the answer to that is going to be a resounding no.
No, not at all. You can tell the future. Good for you, Jason. I appreciate that.
I struggled to put a Colin Baker in my top 60 list, which I wrote up in the summer of 2023. The Two Doctors checks in at number 54. Now, I know when Fraser Gregory, who's been on this show many times, did his list, he actually had all of Trial of a Time Lord as a single entry in his top 60. I appreciate that. I don't personally agree. But there's not a lot of Colin Baker in my top 60, and Vengeance on Varos is nowhere near it.
Jason, you talk so much of your top 60, and it's kind of, and you ask other people about it, but yours has such a big asterisk. So, I mean, it's not quite what you say it is. I mean, is it your top 60 really? But because you objectively say that you avoid putting too many historicals, for instance, for more balance. So that's not a clear. I mean, there's an argument for doing the way you do it, but is it when people hear you ask about a top 60 or talk about your top 60? No, people would not normally do that. They would not assume a person would balance it out like you do.
When Darren Mooney and Andrew Quinn on the 250 are talking about does a movie belong on the IMDb top 250, they talk about, well, this is a movie by Park Chan-wook. How many movies by him need to be on this list? Several. How many movies by Clint Eastwood need to be on this list? Several. Talking about legal thrillers, how many legal thrillers belong on the 250? If you're going to have your 250 as a representative sample of the greatest movies of all time, Witness for the Prosecution needs to be on there, for example, because it's one of the best legal courtroom thrillers ever made. I have a similar philosophy. If my top 60 has every single William Hartnell Dalek story or every single 1960s historical, then it's crowding out a lot of other stuff. So yes, when I say that, just giving a random example, when I say that Husbands of River Song is my 58th best Doctor Who story of all time, it's not. I had to have a Christmas episode on there. That is the best of the Christmas specials. If I were to give an objective score to every single Doctor Who story ever, Husbands of River Song is probably in the top 80 or the top 90 rather than the top 60. So yes, it is an objectified list in which I have informal categories. I had to make sure that Colin Baker was in there. I didn't want to put in every single historical. The Aztecs, as I say time and again, is not on there because the massacre is already there. But that being said, even if we don't take my top 60 as a work of art, even if we take it as an absolute ranking of my top 60 scores, Vengeance on Varos would be much closer to the bottom quarter.
Well, I totally agree. I'm sorry to get off track. But what your list is. I'm not saying it's invalid at all, but it should be more of a top 60 recommended list. The way you balance it.
It was for a Long Island Who convention panel, and then it was an episode of this show which our friend Sean Lyon co-starred on, giving his own top 60, and we had a lot of overlap. Our top 60s had a lot of. In fact, my list that I'm looking at right now has the word Sean in capital letters and boldface next to any story that was also on Sean's top 60. There's an awful lot of Sean on here. I will say that when Pete Rose died yesterday, I immediately went to Facebook and I said Pete Rose absolutely does not belong in the Baseball Hall of Fame because he was ruled ineligible for the Hall of Fame because he was given a permanent ban by Major League Baseball for betting on the Cincinnati Reds when he was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. Mm-hmm. Sean, who's a big Dodgers fan, jumped into that thread. What he didn't know is that I have a lot of contentious, angry people on my Facebook feed who I call them the nitpick chorus, and they had very, very strong opinions about Pete Rose. So Sean and I took it offline and were messaging offline talking about how, wow, there are some really crazy Pete Rose stands out there. But Sean and I have very similar lists, but he wasn't doing what I was doing. He wasn't doing a representative. He was giving me his just favorite 60 outright, and there's still a lot of overlap.
No, I get it, and that's what I would do too. I mean, of course, all of Phil's shows would be my top 20.
Exactly. I think 7 of Philip's 14 serials were in the top 22 in the 2014 DWM survey.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
For me, it's not like what are the best. It's just my favorite. I mean, Terror of the Autons is probably in my top 15. A lot of people don't like that for some reason, but I think there's just so many glorious ways of murder in that are just so fun.
Terror of the Autons is better than Spearhead from Space. The problem with it is that they are going too far in the anti-Liz Shaw direction. And the way that Robert Holmes scripts the Third Doctor as treating Joe Grant is pretty bad. It doesn't hold up very well. And when people say they don't like the Third Doctor, they're saying they don't like the way that Robert Holmes writes for the Third Doctor in that story. It's had a negative effect on the way John Pertwee is received by fandom. But Spearhead from Space is not on my top 60 because there are already 2 other season 7 stories in there, and I didn't want to have all of season 7 on the list. Surprisingly, Terror of the Autons is also not in my top 60. I'm not sure why. Maybe it should be. But because I have so many other Roger Delgado stories in there, maybe that's why it's not there.
Well, like I said, you need to reevaluate everything you do in your life. Wait a minute, I didn't say that, did I?
You're right. I'm reevaluating my life. I am removing you as a guest from the show, and I'll bring in a ringer for the last 7 minutes.
That's fine. That's fine.
No. You're always welcome here, my friend.
No.
The last question we're going to skip. That is the question: should somebody pause the podcast, stream it to a local device? I think that if you're going to watch Doctor Who, you have to watch the entire series. You can't skip any stories. Even the really bad classic series stories have merit to them. Android Invasion, it's a complete flaming mess. It falls apart around Barry Letts' ankles. Part 1 is really, really good. Yeah. Invisible Enemy is proof that Graham Williams should not have been hired to work on the show, because Invisible Enemy basically shows all of his shortcomings in one 90-minute package, except part 1 of Invisible Enemy is really good.
Vengeance on Varos, not to mention the model work in that is great.
Exactly.
Everybody forgets about those special effects in that story because the rest of it is terrible.
There are reasons to watch Vengeance on Varos. Colin Baker is, again, I didn't like Colin Baker coming up in fandom because I mistook the actor for the stories that were written and directed for him. It is not Colin Baker's fault that Ron Jones is a very passive director. Mm-hmm. It is not Colin Baker's fault that Eric Sayward's watchword is violent misogyny. It is not Colin Baker's fault that he was cast by John Nathan Turner and given the worst costume in the history of costumes. Colin Baker is always the quiet at the center of the chaos. Colin Baker is always worth watching. You watch this story to watch Colin Baker enunciate the English language. I just think it's a terrible story, but Colin Baker is one of the things to recommend about it.
Well, I'll give you that. I mean, I think at times he tries to out Shatner, but I mean, that's part of the fun, I guess. But you're right. He's just surrounded by incompetence otherwise.
We use William Shatner as an insult. William Shatner, Shakespearean actor, did a credible British accent in the Alfred Hitchcock Presents series. Shatner was one of the greatest TV actors of his generation. William Shatner is a large part of why Star Trek became Star Trek. People make fun of him because he has become a self-parody later in life, but Shatner's work in Star Trek 2, I will take Shatner's work in Star Trek 2 and put it up against any Academy Award nominated performance that year.
Well, to be fair, I wasn't sometimes he gets overly Shakespearean. Yes, he treats a lot like Shakespeare, but I wasn't really disparaging Shatner there. I was just, the whole Shakespearean thing on television and how it translates if you're an actor, obviously doesn't work because it's more suited for stage. I can go on, we can go on for that forever. But my God, I think Shatner's even more delightful now in his old age because he gets that he's a parody. He's laughing with us now instead of angrily shaking his fist at us and George Takei. Whatever.
He has no filter. He will say whatever comes through his mind, however inappropriate. And when you make it to 93 with all your faculties and your physical strength intact, you can be that kind of person.
It's actually kind of crazy how with it he still is, for all intents and purposes. It's crazy. One day I'll tell you my Shatner story if I hadn't already at an airport. Did I tell you that? You
have told the DeForest Kelley story on this podcast and also in one of the Outside Ins.
Oh gosh, yeah. I am dying. If the Outside Ins come around and they ever do a Twilight Zone, I am going to make sure that Stacy lets me write Nightmare at 20,000 Feet because my Shatner story is perfect for that.
I will point out that when I was in your home, unlike Bill Evenson, I am not banned from setting foot in your home.
You never will, but you're always welcome. We wish you'd come back soon.
And you showed me your Nick of Time from the Twilight Zone toy set, and I actually pulled questions out of the dispenser on the air, and I was getting really negative answers.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of downbeat episode. They finally just it's a great episode. It's so subtle, and it's about really addiction in a lot of ways, and desperation. And I think the way they finally get out of it, by just getting out of this psychological loop, and finally convinces himself, we can make our own destinies, is really beautiful. I love that episode.
I believe it's Richard Matheson. So anytime Richard Matheson
Mhm.
is there, you're going to get a great script. The most disturbing part of Nick of Time is not the Devil's Head fortune teller. It is not William Shatner's slow descent into addiction. It is not the couple that comes in to the cafe after William Shatner and Patricia Breslin leave, who are clearly addicted to the machine. And the guy's tie is all crooked and they're all drenched in flop sweat. You know what the most disturbing part of Nick of Time is?
Well, what are you going to do? Tell me.
Stafford Rep. I would have sworn on a stack of Bibles, I would come home from school in the first grade and at 4 o'clock, Metro Media, Channel 5, later Fox Channel 5 in New York, would show Batman.
Yeah.
4 o'clock every day for years. I would have sworn on a stack of Hebrew Bibles that Stafford Rep was really Irish. To have Stafford Rep in this episode as a mechanic not using his O'Hara accent is really weird. It's an uncanny valley effect.
Yeah, probably. It's funny, but hey, man, that's acting. Good on him.
I know. And he did Nick of Time before he did Batman 66.
Yep. So all these people, when he was on Batman for all those episodes, they were like, "Where did he get his Irish accent? This is weird."
And of course, watching it now as a grown man who has been to Ireland recently and has broken bread with friends in Ireland, Stafford Rep is not obviously the most authentic Irish accent ever. It's a TV comedy version of an Irish accent. But I thought it was real when I was a kid coming up.
Well, I think as you've even pointed out, it's like it's like American accents. Everybody has a Jewish Brooklyn accent. For any comedy character that's American in any other country's representation of an American citizen.
That's the reason why I moved back to New York from the Midwest in 1999. I stayed in the Midwest after law school. I was working out there for a year. The Sopranos debuts on HBO in January 1999. And even though it takes place in North Jersey, it's all the Brooklyn Italian. There's a different Brooklyn Jewish and a different Brooklyn Italian accent. The Brooklyn Italian accent is very distinctive. Tony Soprano, Tony Sirico, everybody on that show. That accent, watching The Sopranos, gave me such homesickness. Sopranos premieres mid-January 99. I moved back to New York late February 99. The Sopranos is the reason why I left the Midwest and came back to New York, where, with a couple of exceptions, I've remained for most of the last 25 years. So thank you, Brooklyn accent. Thank you, David Chase.
Yeah, never seen an episode. But
you've never seen an episode of The Sopranos.
I told you I don't watch TV.
I feel like I don't even know you anymore, man. In 30 years' time, when The Sopranos is as old as The Twilight Zone is now, you'll start watching it and you'll appreciate it until, of course, it goes off the rails the last 3 or 4 seasons.
I'll tell you, I'll probably watch every episode of The Twilight Zone 3 times before I start The Sopranos, if I ever do.
The late stage episode of The Sopranos with both Ben Kingsley and Lauren Bacall. The A plot is one of the greatest half hours of television ever made. The B plot is one of the worst half hours of television ever made, and it's in the exact same hour. But the Lauren Bacall, Ben Kingsley stuff is incredible. Highly recommended.
I didn't even know they were ever in the show. Those are both tremendous actors. I'd watch it. Maybe I'll just watch that episode.
It's like Mad Men. The acting is always superlative. Even if the episode is one of the weaker ones, the acting is always phenomenal. Same with Better Call Saul and to a lesser extent Breaking Bad. I watch those shows for the acting, if nothing else.
Never seen any one of those.
Well, next time on Doctor Who Literature, we're going to give Barsky a TV education.
Well, no, hey, I know all about those shows. Trust me. In fact, oh my God, funny story. When Dirty Jobs was nominated for Emmys a couple times, and at one of the ceremonies, we were going inside, and this guy in a cowboy hat comes up to Mike. I was standing right next to him. Comes up to Mike. Oh my God, Mike Rowe, we love your show. We watch it on set all the time. Everybody, it makes us laugh every single time. And Mike's like, oh man, thanks. It really means a lot. Thanks, whatever. And the guy took off, whatever. Guy in the cowboy hat. And Mike turns to me and goes, who was that? I said, that was Brian. I said, that was Bryan Cranston.
Oh wow. Whoa.
It's pretty funny. So he
My wife
watches
is-
my show. I don't watch his, but I'll tell you this: I will watch that show. A lot of people have said a lot of great things to me. I'll see that before I see Sopranos. Mainly because I'll tell you, just mob movies, mob shows, they're just boring to me. It's always the same thing. You know, some of the writing, the characterization, sure, when the television you get to flesh out these characters more, sure, it's probably better. But mob movies I haven't even seen any of the Godfather movies. Okay, I just do not like that genre.
I did not care for The Godfather.
What?
Did not care for The Godfather.
How can you even say that, Dad?
Didn't like it.
Peter, it's so good. It's like the perfect movie.
This is what everyone always says. Whenever they say,
Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. I mean, you never see Robert Duvall.
No, fine actor. Did not like the movie.
Why not?
Couldn't get into it.
Explain yourself. What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
It insists upon itself.
What does that even mean?
Because it has a valid point to make. It's insistent.
It takes forever getting in. You know, you spend like 6.5 hours, and then, you know, I can't even get through. I can't even finish the movie. I've never even seen the ending.
You've never seen the ending?
Well, how can you say you don't like it if you haven't even given it a chance?
I agree with Stewie. It's not really fair.
I have tried on 3 separate occasions to get through it, and I get to the scene where all the guys are sitting around on the easy chairs.
Yeah, it's a great scene. I love that
It's
scene.
been noted in every annal.
I have no idea what they're talking about. It's like they're speaking a different language. That's where I lose interest and
You
I
know
go
what,
away.
Peter?
Speaking Italian.
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just don't like that genre, so that's why I probably haven't watched any of those Godfather movies. I'd watch that. I'd definitely watch Breaking Bad and probably Better Call Saul before Sopranos. I also want to see what's that movie Oz or The Wire. The Wire is supposed to be really great.
I have never seen The Wire because I was living in Baltimore when Homicide was being made. I loved Homicide. I watched all 7 seasons. When The Wire came around, it was a moment of time when I wasn't subscribing to HBO, so I've never taken the time to see it. I'm aware that it's supposed to be one of television's crowning achievements, even better than Homicide. I have not. I too have my blind spots. I watched Breaking Bad when it was coming up live, and I enjoyed it. In retrospect, large elements of Breaking Bad do not work for me. Better Call Saul is both a sequel and a prequel to Breaking Bad. Better Call Saul will not work unless you've seen Breaking Bad first, because all these surprise revelations and returns of characters wouldn't make any sense if you don't have the context. But Better Call Saul, I will die on this hill, is a much better series than Breaking Bad. But you have to watch all of Breaking Bad, and you have to get through the very uneven first season of Better Call Saul before you recognize that.
Sometimes these shows take, a good season to find their way. It happens a lot.
Same with Colin Baker. Colin Baker's first season objectively is not very good. His second season is much better because they've had 18 months to correct the mistakes. And they brought Colin Baker down to earth, and he's less obnoxious, and he has a better relationship with Perry. And then Bonnie Langford shows up. So yeah, Colin Baker too. You have to get through some deep hurting before you get to the good stuff. And then of course his Big Finish work, which everyone loves, is much, much further into the future after that.
Yeah, sure. I don't listen to Big Finish, but yeah, everybody says he's just amazing in Big Finish, and he's a much better doctor there because the writing is probably much better than it was, especially in season 22.
We are just about at the end of our hour, Mr. Barsky. We have talked a lot about things that are not Vengeance on Varos. We have talked about Vengeance on Varos a little bit. The story that I enjoyed in 1985, have never enjoyed again. I think it's very problematic. I think the book is an interesting glimpse as to what Philip Martin wanted, but the prose is atrocious, and some of the it's not so much a change from the TV, but an alteration as to what the TV was supposed to have been doesn't make the story any better, and I will explore that in my audio essay after the break. But before we do that, you will be back on the show for a Sylvester Stallone episode. I mean a Sylvester McCoy episode.
Oh boy.
In a few more months. A story that actually has some interesting parallels to Vengeance on Varos.
Well, it's probably one of the reasons why I chose it, actually, because it's similar in theme or some of the parallels as you allude to.
I try to be positive. This is a positive show. This is a show to celebrate Doctor Who. This is not a hate watch. Vengeance on Varos is one of the stories that really grinds my gears, to go back to Family Guy as a quote.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The cliffhanger of episode 1 is sort of a prophetic image for what happens to the Colin Baker in the show itself, I guess.
In isolation, it is one of the great Doctor Who cliffhangers.
What? Really?
I think it is.
Oh, we should talk about that. I mean, why?
It is the fact that you have the directors on Varos staging that moment for TV and cutting very closely parallels a scene in The Running Man, which had not come out. It was 2 years in the future. It's basically predicting what happens in The Running Man in 1987.
Okay, well, as shot, yeah, it's pretty well done with the image going out and all that kind of stuff. But it's with the doctor, we're supposed to believe the doctor's dead, and supposedly he faked it, but they don't. The doctor never says he does. It's only, I mean, in the book, of course, that they made sure we knew he faked his death, quote unquote. But it's only said by, I think, the governor or somebody else. Supposedly they said he faked his death, but the doctor never confirms that in the televised serial.
So this is my curse. I've spent most of the last hour plus harshing on Vengeance on Varos. Out of the spirit of conciliation and goodwill, I say a very nice thing about Vengeance on Varos, and you disagree with me. Tell me I'm wrong.
Hey, that's what makes the world go round, Jason. We're trying to, opinions. We're broadening each other's horizons. I mean, look, there's a lot of good things about it, and I did agree. I first agreed with you about the way it was presented. Director Ron Jones or whoever edited this, I did think that was clever. But the fact that it's the Doctor stuff, how do we ever believe that the Doctor's ever in jeopardy? I mean, is that ever really a thing that we can really be worried about to tune in next week?
It is a meta play on the audience's expectations. We know that when the Doctor dies at a cliffhanger, he's not actually dead. But we're not watching Doctor. We're watching people watching Doctor Who. We're watching people watch a cliffhanger and thinking that it's real.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. That part is brilliant. But the Doctor faking his death, is that really is that good Doctor Who writing?
Peter Capaldi fakes a regeneration in the Monk trilogy in his final TV season.
A regeneration is way more dramatic than closing your eyes and God knows what would have happened. There's no way that character, the Doctor, would know what would happen next. How does he know a laser beam wouldn't have come out and destroyed his body right there and then?
Well, that takes
there's
us
no
back
logic
to
to what he
territory.
does. There's just no logic to what he does there. But again, you are right. The way it was shot, the way it was written is great, except for the fact that I don't believe the Doctor in that moment.
I'm going to let Vengeance on Varos take the win for that one particular moment because I'm going to be doing my audio essay next. That is certainly not going to be very complimentary. Barsky, you will be back on the show from McCoy. Have a great trip to Japan. And we have had this has been a real 15-round interview. We've definitely gone through it. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, no, same here. And I'm looking forward to hearing your essay. Maybe I'll have to wear my anti-hallucination helmet while I'm listening.
The vervoids are probably the best dirty joke in Doctor Who.
They're hermaphroditic plants.
A lot of plants are.
So there you go. It's based on science.
No, they'll ship anything.
There are probably 11 and handle shippers out there. You just have to drill a hole where his mouth is, and you're all set.
He needs the room. I've seen it in pictures.
I'm not saying you're not a fan. I'm saying you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Doctor Who gives a drunken Doctor Who podcast for the end times. You are listening to Doctor Who literature. Keep turning the pages!
Doctor Who, Vengeance on Varos by Philip Martin. Televised as Vengeance on Varos. Teleplay by Philip Martin. Televised in January 1985. Paperback release date June 16, 1988. Target book number 106. Cover artist David McAllister. The TARDIS has stalled in mid-flight, and it is only on the planet Varos that the Doctor can find the precious Zyton 7 ore he needs to continue his travels through time and space. Arriving on the planet, he saves the rebel Jondar from execution and incurs the wrath of Syl, the sadistic representative of the Galatron Mining Corporation on Varos. The hunt is on for the Doctor and his rebel friends, and as they are pursued through the corridors of the Deadly Punishment Dome, the Doctor discovers that the people of Varos have some very disturbing ideas of entertainment. Yes, you heard me right earlier, Book 106. It's the springtime of 1988, and springtime, as the old saying goes, is the time that a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love, and to quote my old high school physics teacher, the late Mr. Gordon, when a student's brain turns to mush. June 1988, being the last month of my first year of high school, and my brain had both turned to thoughts of love, albeit not lightly, and was definitely in a state of mush. At this point in time, I was bewitched by a girl named Jocelyn, who was even bigger a baseball fan than I was. Is that possible? I can hear you asking at home. Jocelyn was a year older than me, and she also read Philip Roth novels, which I hasten to mention because when it comes to the great writers of the Western canon named Philip, the late Mr. Roth, whose former wife, Claire Bloom, has acted in Doctor Who, so there is a connection to this podcast, however tenuous. The late Mr. Roth is the only such Philip in the Western canon we'll be talking about today. Now Jocelyn and I are still friends, never went a millimeter beyond that. She moved from New York to the Deep South after 9/11 and currently does the Lord's work with voter registration in one of those blood red states where your voter registration gets purged if you're signed up with the wrong party, which has nothing at all to do with life on the planet Varos. Nothing. That's the frustrating part for me about Varos. There is an incredible story to be told here, even now in the year 2024. What happens on Varos is right up against that story. I wouldn't say that Philip Martin keeps missing it, but he does stress the emphasis on the wrong syllable, as the man says, and both the TV story Left Behind and the book that came out of it is always just slightly out of focus for me. Plus, we have to mention the fact that the Target books, like my brain in the spring of 1988, were kind of turning to mush. In publication order, the last three paperbacks go number 127, number 127, and number 106. This manuscript, as I mentioned earlier, was turned in 2 years late, which is why the cover painting is by David McAllister, who painted several Targets between 1981 and 1987, spanning the Keys of Marinus through the Space Museum, but was no longer taking contracts from Target by this point, having turned in his Varos cover painting 2 years earlier, and with the now defunct Neon Tube logo being on it. From this point on, the books will resume regular, sane, normal numbering, but the late submission of Varos does seem to have sent the line into a momentary period of bewildered confusion. And speaking of bewildered confusion, that is the state of my brain after having read this book, which I don't do very often, but I had to do it for the podcast. This is not to say that Philip Martin doesn't get the Target's line and its philosophy. Chapter 4 is entitled Escape to Danger After All, or Escape into Danger, I guess. But Martin also inherits some negative aspects of Target novelizations. Chapter 5, entitled The Purple Zone, might as well call it the Purple Prose. Turning back to Chapter 1 for literal starters, Martin chooses to cram his 4-sentence opening paragraph into a single, eternal run-on sentence. Page 1, quote, "The random laser beam emitter turned ominously on its axis, clicked as if in irritation, then spat a searing beam of force at the lean young man chained to a wall in a corridor deep within the main punishment dome of the former prison planet of Varos." Pause to take a deep breath. The run-on sentences don't end there. Barsky performed a great example for you, which is later in the book. Beyond the endless string of endless sentences is bad prose with bad similes. The random laser beam emitter sounds as, quote, as if an elephant had been mortally wounded and had decided to share its death throes. Yikes. And there's sexism too, of course, as befitting a story that came out during the Eric Sayward era. The TARDIS is a her, which is a standard gender assignment for sailing ships, but Jonder's girlfriend Arita is referred to as his woman, as Perry also is for the Doctor, not to mention the whole sadistic torture and transmogrification of Perry and Arita from the original scripts. And racism, in the form of the description of the, quote, strapping, end quote, and, quote, black-skinned, unquote, Thoros Alphen security guards. Stereotype much? Now, maybe this is part and parcel of how a middle-aged British man's thought processes would have gone in 1988 or 1986 when this started being written. Martin turned 50 a month after this paperback belatedly hit the shelves. But as the rest of the Sylvester McCoy era is about to join the target range, we are about to radically rethink whether or not non-white, non-male characters are quote-unquote exotic creatures whose mere presence in the book needs to be signposted with unusual adjectives. Martin's novelization is based on his original scripts for Vengeance on Varos, so there are several deleted scenes and plot threads. Some elements of the story seem to have been rethought in the interim between TV broadcast and book release, but sadly there is no explanation for the Doctor's casual murder of a dome security guard during the rescue of Jandar in Chapter 4. Rondell dies with the, quote, flesh of his throat torn open. That's thoroughly unpleasant. The controversial acid bath scene from early in Part 2 is particularly galling in print, as the Doctor intentionally engages in matador-like moves in order to trip the Varosian mortuary attendants to their doom. The scene on TV was staged as slapstick, where the guards trip themselves to death, and the Doctor is a sardonically amused bystander. I have problems with the TV staging, but the book presentation is truly unconscionable.
Forgive me if I don't join you.
What despicable creatures these Varosian rulers were, thinks Perry, in a characteristic bit of unsubtle prose. But we come to these books for more than just prose delight, or, in this case, torture. Martin provides good detail about his secondary characters. Why does Etta watch so much TV? Come to find out, she has a side hustle with the VBC's Audience Appreciation Index, and that's why she no longer cooks food for her minor husband, so busy is she watching the telly and taking notes. Etta is always threatening to turn in Arik for treason, and they both panic when the TV screen goes blank for even a second. That is genuine insight and pays off the prose. Now this may or may not be continuity, but a book-only character, Severin, shares a name with Stephen Yardley's other and far better Doctor Who character, Severin from Genesis of the Daleks. The book also teaches us a lot more about Varosian politics, although I am still confused as to how Varos' constitution grants greater power to the chief officer, a law enforcement figure, than to the governor himself. In the U.S. Constitution, the analogy would be the Attorney General, or his underling, the Director of the FBI, outranking the President. We get deeper into the chief's side hustle with Syl 2. A lot of side hustles on this planet, just like on ours. That is one future prediction that Martin nails 100%, how in the 21st century economy the side hustle has become the main source of income for many subjects living under end-stage capitalism. Martin has again thought through Varos' rule of law, mentioning a tantalizing holiday called National Pardon Day. You can imagine this as a bookend to the recent movie and TV franchise based on The Purge. Now we also learn that the governor earned his job through the unlucky drawing of a lot, Shirley Jackson lottery style.
I think we should start over. It wasn't fair. They didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Well, you all saw that. Please listen to me. Joe didn't give Bill enough time.
Now, I am being perhaps a little unfair to the story. I am trying to balance between the nature of this podcast, which is trying to be a positive look at the books, and this particular TV story, which does not hold any special place in my affections. Martin does appear to be baffled at times by Sayward's excessively cruel depiction of the season 22 Sixth Doctor. After the Doctor shouts at Perry, Martin slyly adds, quote, for some reason. Perry is said to follow the Doctor, quote, more out of habit than of sense. Martin does get to the core of what makes the Doctor, quote, a demonstration of spirit that said, no matter what odds or forces ranged against us, we will oppose with strength, ingenuity, and cunning if need be. Martin also describes how the Doctor feigns death at the Part 1 cliffhanger, which is a nice addition to the mythology. And one good thing about the book is that we are spared the awful line readings of the character backs as we heard them on television.
Governor, May I suggest you do something to please, to entertain, to please the people, just to give yourself time to recover your strength?
Another good thing we can say about the book is Chapter 8. It is entirely new material. It's an interlude, a reflective pause before the Part 2 material kicks off, showing Varos at nighttime, including a naked Martin Jarvis in his bath, the Sayward scripted padding scenes in Part 1 on TV. Anything involving Quillam are not in the book since they were not present in Martin's own scripts on which the book is based, so Quillam gets a later and more dramatic entrance. Because the Part 2 material was trimmed down so much for TV, Martin is able to include a lot of added material that we had not seen on video. Some of that is interesting, such as the story behind Jondar's arrest. Other more sadistic tales of torture inside the punishment dome are needlessly reinstated. Some impossible visual effects cut from Martin's scripts, ambulatory shadows, a bottomless pit of fire, a spacewalk on Varos' airless surface are all reinstated, but even then Martin keeps piling on more and more sadism and despair, a kick in the teeth, to what in my mind is Doctor Who's signature optimism. We get humor when Syl's voice translator explodes in Chapter 11, and its replacement speaks in funny misquotes. Actually, no, check that. It doesn't explode. Under Martin's turgid prose, it, quote, went into terminal compression in its attempts to hold Syl's wrath to manageable proportions, gave up on the struggle, and exploded zumtow on Syl's chest, releasing the pure sound of Thoros' beaten invective, a screeching assault on the hearing that made that squeal of chalk on blackboard melodious by comparison. As you do. The humor, with Syl's new voice translator saying things like acupuncture instead of occupation, or February of science instead of March of science, also comes at the wrong time in the narrative, as Perry is horrifically being turned into a bird creature or something.
Dead as death.
And I'm sorry, I can't let this go, but then again, Martin can't let a sentence go either, so here's one more mother of all run-on sentences, quote, Then the Thoros beaten began to howl with maniacal laughter that quite drowned any further attempt Bax might take to draw attention to the mysterious blue object with police box written on its side that had appeared on a screen fed by a subsidiary wide-angle camera that was routinely taking a master shot of the imminent laser obliteration. Heavens to Betsy, even. Coming to find out, that wasn't Jondar being tortured in the punishment dome. It was Ernest Hemingway and the entire English language.
The whole state is suddenly in the grip of lottery fever, and Springfield is no exception. In fact, every copy of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery has been checked out from the Springfield Public Library. Of course, the book does not contain any hints on how to win the lottery. It is rather a chilling tale of conformity gone mad.
Next time on Doctor Who Literature, we come to a story which, sort of the inverse of Vengeance on Varos, is a story that is not widely regarded or beloved by wide segments of fandom, but it is a story that I quite enjoy, and not just in a guilty pleasure sense either. We are going back in time to the Patrick Troughton era, too early in Season 4, when the production team and the lead actor hadn't quite figured out the final shape of the second Doctor's character. It is a story that is all over the place, sometimes in very, very, very glorious ways. Nothing in the world can stop us now. As author of the novelization, Nigel Robinson joins me to talk about the underwater menace and so much more of his Doctor Who writing career. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer is David Barsky. Each episode is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed. Our YouTube channel is run by. And our opening segment this week was written and performed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, David Barsky. This podcast can be found on your podcast app of choice, with all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature, at gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.